We're almost ready to go. We were going to put someone out in front with a sandwich board to like bring more people in with a big arrow, like you're on a corner selling mattresses. A couple more minutes here, and we'll get going. All right, we're going to get started here. Thank you for coming. I know it's mid-morning. We'll try to keep you awake with some fun stuff about the way to design. This is a little startup, big impact. I am super excited to be here with you all. Maybe just as we get started, I'd love to just have a quick show of hands. How many of you would self-identify as a designer? All right, so maybe like 40% of you, awesome. And the rest of you are, how many are business folks or business entrepreneurs? And then maybe technologists as the third bucket. Okay, wow, awesome. All right, well, we've got an hour together, and we want to kind of have a very interactive dialogue. We're gonna spend about, I don't know, 35 minutes or so, the three of us, riffing on some really neat ideas, I think, and then we're going to kind of open it up to you all to engage with us. I will maybe just hand it over to my two co-panelists here to introduce themselves, and then I'll tee up kind of how we're going to drive the discussion. So, Cara.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm Cara Delzer. I'm the CEO of Moxxly, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for coming. A bit on my bio, I began my career as a first grade teacher with Teach for America, and I honestly think that nothing prepared me more for being a startup founder than teaching first grade. After that, I spent a couple of years working in education as an investor and an operator, then went to business school, and I was working at eBay in category management before co-founding Moxxly.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gabrielle Guthrie, designer, co-founder of Moxxly. I have a background in small-scale manufacturing in New York, a lot of ceramic work and jewelry work before going back to school for product design.
Awesome, and I'm Steve Vassallo. I'm a general partner at Foundation Capital. We are a 22-year-old venture firm based in Silicon Valley, and we do early-stage investments in tech companies like Netflix, Lending Club, Sunrun, and many others. Before that, I was actually a product designer, so I started my career at a company called IDEO, worked there for a few years, and then found myself as the head of product and engineering at a couple of startups, one which I helped take public, and then another one which was acquired. And then I found myself at Foundation actually as an entrepreneur in residence. I was on the path to starting my next company, and a few months in, after working on this project and bringing a few interesting entrepreneurs through, they asked me to be an investor, and that was a little over 10 years ago. And I can tell you just, and this is sort of the frame for the conversation today, as an investor, if I think about when I meet with designers today, so people who kind of are basically doing what I was trying to do 20 years ago, and I think about what it is that they have as resources at their disposal to go from becoming a designer to becoming a designer founder. There just aren't that many really kind of practical, tactical resources out there. There's a lot of sort of high-level industry insights, lots of sort of stats on design metrics, but I'm struck by the fact that when I meet these folks who are really itching to do more, they are struggling with some of the sort of very specific things to get started. And so as a former product designer, I felt like, oh, I need to help this crew. This is my tribe. I wrote a book. It's called The Way to Design, and it's really about three things. One, to help designers level up to become designer founders, but also, and this is a really important piece, to help the business co-founders and technology co-founders understand how to build a design-led company and also how to use design really to sort of have more meaningful impact in the world. In order to write the book, I met with 50 design scholars, historians, designer founders, including both Cara and Gabrielle. And what I want to do today is just kind of share with you a bit about sort of what we learned in that process. So maybe I'll kick it off with talk a little bit about the founding story of Moxxly, kind of what was the origin of the idea.
So we came at it from, there's 3 co-founders, actually. Shantia Alidas is not with us today because she just had an adorable baby girl a few weeks ago. So the 3 of us came at it from very different approaches. My approach was part of my master's thesis project. My project partner and I knew that we wanted to design for women because we saw that 80% of consumer purchases are made by women, and yet you have 8% of men, or 8% of mechanical engineers are women, and 12% are industrial designers. So there is this gap. We were always clear on our why, which is we wanted to bring female voices to design for women, but we didn't know what our what would be. So we started our process, we started by looking at a map of a woman's life and then taking intersections. Where are the critical points of critical turning points in a woman's life, and started interviewing people at those points. And we met this woman named Laura. She just returned to work from maternity leave at Apple, and we thought we were going to talk about what's it like to be a female in a male-dominated space. She's an engineer at Apple, and instead she just wanted to talk all about her breast pump. And it was the first time that I had seen a breast pump. Raise of hands, who knows what I'm talking about when I say breast pump? Okay, so for the rest of the crowd, breast pump is what a woman needs to use in order to provide milk for her baby when she's not around the baby, and it currently involves completely derobing and putting on these 2 foreign-looking objects to your chest and leaning forward and pumping milk for 20 minutes every 3 hours. And by the way, the American Medical Society recommends doing this for a year. So here I am, I'm seeing this for the first time, and I'm shocked, and she just keeps pulling parts out of her bag, and I keep getting more and more shocked. And so from that moment on, the what was breast pumps for me. And shortly before graduation, I realized, like, I can't not do this anymore, and continued on to find co-founder Cara.
So, meanwhile, across town, I had just returned to work after having my first child with my giant breast pump bag slung over my shoulder. And I went through a couple of months of what Gabrielle described. And for me, it was the indignity not only of all of these parts and the mechanics of it all and squeezing those pump sessions into my day, but the particular pain point was the mode switching, going from showing up at work, being a confident professional woman, like just nailing that presentation, and then 30 seconds later, my shirt's off, I'm in the unused conference room, hoping that nobody needs to use that conference room today, slumped over like this, feeling vulnerable and embarrassed and missing out on what I came to work to do. So I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I knew that the problem or the thing that I wanted to work on would find me. I didn't see it coming in breast pumps. I never would have predicted that. But I couldn't shake this feeling that, like, this indignity is happening all across bathrooms and conference rooms and cars and parking lots across the country and the world, and I wanted to be a part of the solution. So I quit my job and started on my entrepreneurial path, doing a lot of user needs, user studies, a lot of market research to really understand the lay of the land, and was introduced to Gabrielle through mutual friends. And it was just kind of the right fit at the right time.
Now, I think about you two as prime examples of the way designer-founder is defined in the book. And you all self-identify as designer-founders. And for folks maybe who haven't kind of embraced or heard the concept of designer-founder, what is different about a designer-founder than a non-designer-founder, if you will? What's sort of special about it?
Yeah, so I think designer founders understand that there isn't a linear path from where they are to where they're going to go, and the point of it all is not the product at the end or the service that they're providing, but it's really following the process and the discovery and making sense of and shifting focus and direction as you go along based on what the process is demonstrating to you.
Building off that, there's a transition now in understanding that design is no longer a noun, it's a verb, right? So it's an approach. It's not like just designing pretty things or coming in at the end of the process to make it pretty, but it's a complete process and a way of thinking and applying everything that you do in the company, whether it's building the brand, building the team, building the culture, building the product, having this mindset of iteration, exploration, and coming back to that again and again.
Yeah. In the book, there's this Venn diagram. Some of you have seen sort of probably different variations of it, of sort of having a sensibility around user-centered design and building products that people want or love, right? And as designers, we're kind of trained to start with that, and then there's this other overlay, of course, technology. Can you actually build the product? Is it something that can be made for positive gross margins and build, sort of solve the technical issues? And then there's the third circle of viability. Can you actually build a business around it? Can you actually sort of see that this thing can be more than just an idea that has a cool technology perhaps underneath the covers that meets a real human need, but can it actually be a sustainable business? So those three circles in some senses are the three of you, your co-founder Shanti, who's not here, but talk a little bit about how you found each other. That's a tricky thing to navigate a co-founding relationship. You guys had lots of tricks for how to kind of get that balance. Maybe share a little bit of that would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So bringing in Shanti's story as well, the way that we pulled in Shanti and started working with Shanti was through a hackathon. So we were also introduced through mutual friends, but it wasn't until this hackathon where I showed up with a breast pump and said, you know what, this is the state of the art of what we have right now. It kind of looks like a cross between a medical device and a baby toy, but I think we can do better this weekend. And Shanti and I built a team of 7, 1 weekend long hackathon, and we did do better. We took judges' favorite, and it planted the seed in her mind that this is something that she wanted to work on before she has to go through it. And then Cara and I found each other because I was flyering constantly looking for feedback for the thesis project that we were looking on. We didn't have any moms in our network, and so we were constantly asking word of mouth, talking to everyone we could. So I think the lesson for me was just, if you're thinking about starting something, if you're starting something, to just talk to as many people as you can, get out there, work with other people.
So Steve mentions in the book this Venn diagram of complementary skill sets, and I think it was in part just sort of dumb luck that the three of us found one another at that summer when we were all kind of at a transitional point in our life, and we suddenly became passionate about breast pumps. Like, that doesn't happen every day. But what I think made it work, and what I think the lesson here for other startups is that at the center of that Venn diagram, the overlapping areas are around values and trust and passion. And if that overlapping area of the Venn diagram is big enough, then maybe you could get by with only two bubbles of the Venn, or maybe you could have 4. But at the center here, it was, for the 3 co-founders, it wasn't about the breast pump itself. It's never been about the product. It was about building a brand for modern working women and making this experience, as well as other experiences in her life, better. And we all had a very personal stake in it. We're designing products that we want to use ourselves and that our friends are currently using. So it was very personal, and that's what keeps us together. Because if we were just random businesswoman, random designer, and random engineer thrown together to work on a project, like, maybe it would work, but maybe it wouldn't. And I think you find that those values, you have to be kind of intentional about it. Like, Gabrielle and I worked together for a summer. We would meet up several times a week, and it was awkward when we first started founder dating. We'd ask awkward questions like, "Tell me about your parents. Do you have any hobbies? Did you have a pet when you grew up? Like, just, you know, the kind of awkward dating questions you ask. But you get to know one another, and then you work on a real project and feel what it feels like to give one another feedback. Or, you know, what happens when we hit a roadblock? How do we actually work together? So we simulated what it would be like before we jumped in.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. Knowing what we know now about what we would look for if we were to do it again is really thinking about conflict, because you're going to have a lot of conflict in startups especially. And so how do your partners, your potential co-founders, deal with conflict?
So one of the assertions in the book, and I think both Cara and Gabrielle are manifestations of this, is that people who have the sensitivity around design are becoming more and more valuable in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And there's, I think, 3 reasons why that's happening, and maybe just to kind of bounce on them quickly. So, you know, I started my career actually as a technologist when I was at IDEO. I was originally doing robotics and embedded systems, and I will tell you that design wasn't held in very high regard. In fact, David Kelly, the founder of IDEO, used to say that designers were brought in kind of in the 11th hour, almost to like be the stylist, to basically take what the engineers had already conceived of and make that look pretty. I mean, it was literally like a job shop, bolt on. But what has, I think, absolutely been the case is over the last 20 years, really, there's been a dramatic commoditization, of course, of the technology. You can go to Amazon Web Services and tilt up your own website in minutes. There's so many much easier ways to sort of get started. And what you're seeing now is, while we have, you know, the next wave, the next kind of platform shift coming with machine learning and AI, we're sort of seeing this sort of trailing off. Moore's Law, it's been sort of, you know, this trustworthy friend, metronomic march, doubling of performance every 18 months. Like, that's slowing down. So we'll jump curves to a new technology, I'm sure, but technology is definitely hitting kind of this asymptote. So that's thing 1. Thing 2 is, basically, I think consumers' expectations have never been higher around not just that thing that's in your pocket today, because, you know, great thanks to Steve Jobs and Apple, but you expect that level of experience from your education, from your healthcare provider, from the enterprise apps that you guys are using. And so this whole sort of trend towards consumerization of fill in the blank, I think is really driving this notion that design and what's happening kind of at the top of the stack, if you will, is more important than ever. I think the third thing, and this is kind of comes back to what Gabrielle alluded to before, is that the very definition of design has actually changed. So 20 years ago, it really was the drapes and the drop shadows. You're like, you'd walk into a room, people are like, oh, you're the designer, and they'd immediately look at your shoes and like, hey, nice shoes, where'd you get those? Like, and I think that notion and that aesthetic component, the craft component, still matters in so many ways. But this question of what problem are you trying to solve? What question are you going to answer? What opportunity are you going to go after? That what is really, I think, central to design. And that wasn't the case, I think, 20 or 30 years ago. So I'm curious kind of how you talked about it wasn't about the product. It was about something much greater. Talk about that, the what, and kind of how you all agreed on that and saw that.
So the what really depended on our users. Like, we're very user-centered, women-centered in our design. And so obviously we needed user-centered feedback and input along the way. But we quickly found out that that you can't just go out and talk to users, like poll them or send a survey to 1,000 women and ask them what they want, because you just get yanked in so many different directions. And there's no woman who has seen a breast pump who doesn't have strong opinions about how that could be better. So very quickly we needed to have some structure around how we go about getting user feedback and then how we feed it in. And that structure really is balanced on what our brand stands for and what kind of experience and emotions we want to create for women. How are we going to give her a dignified pumping experience? And from that, then we can kind of be open to how we get there. But you've got to have this North Star of this is what our brand is, this is what our goal is, and here's the structured process that we're going to go through to get user input and to help us design this.
So one of the goals of the book was to get really practical. And as I mentioned before, actually the very specific skills that you need to go and level up on, the kinds of frameworks that I think are very natural, perhaps, to people who come out of the business or technical domain. And so in the book, there's this really this illustration, this 5-pointed star, that are the ways that that we really believe that you'll generate the next sort of generation of design tech leaders. And so I want to bounce on just a couple of them. There's a lot more in the book, but one of the ones that was very clear to me within the sort of first 10 interviews was that all of the designer founders that we met with, from everyone from Evan Sharp, who's the founder of Pinterest, to Joe Gebbia at Airbnb, they all really struggled with this concept of breaking out of the craft box. This is point number 4. And you know, in so many ways as a designer, like, your greatest gift is this sort of ability to sort of impart your, you know, your perspective, your view, your points of view on the world at every level of detail. And that sort of tiny level of detail can sometimes get in the way of you seeing the larger picture. And so I think it'd be super helpful to sort of talk about some of the ways that you guys have been able to zoom in and zoom out. What are the sort of tricks, and have you ever sort of struggled with this, you know, perfectionism affliction, as it were?
Yeah, completely. So I can share a failure story from our process. We went out and we, as Cara said, we're very user-centered. We were talking to lots of people, building up prototypes, going out and testing with them. And we thought that we were getting the results that we wanted. People were loving the brand, the vision, and it was discreet and hands-free, and we were meeting our goals. And so we decided to charge forward. You know, a lot of late nights and a lot of work to get to the point where we're like, okay, we're ready. We're gonna cut steel. We're gonna kick off tooling, lock design, and get into manufacturing. So we got into manufacturing. Spent a few months on the floor, sent back our first units, so excited to have like these real units in our hands and get them back to users for feedback. And you know, we set up this event for them to kick off our first real big beta, and everyone was so excited, and the packaging was there, and like everything was all lined up. And then we send them home for their week-long test, and then slowly the calls start coming in, like, it's not working, maybe I'm doing something wrong, and it's like, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. And so it was this huge moment for us where we realized that, oh my God, we've been testing for the wrong thing, and we've been looking for the wrong thing. We were so focused on, like you said, like the widget, and like how every little thing works and fits together, and the parting lines, right? We're so focused in on that detail that we completely missed the bigger picture of what are we testing for? How do we know that we're successful? You know, what are our biggest risks? And how do we de-risk early?
And to layer onto that, the cash we burned on that failure was significant. If any of you have ever tooled up a hardware production line, you know the zeros that come on that PO. And honestly, just the cash burn has been a very real pressure point to cutting off the perfectionism, right? Like, we don't have time to spin cycles. We don't have time to get the experts in all the time to make everything perfect. And from that beta test, we didn't have time to do a full retool. So we said, all right, we're going to focus the product and just get this part right next, and then we'll do the second part later. But that failure really gave us a lot of focus, and we had to stay lean.
Yeah, I think there's so many examples, I think, in that around what happens oftentimes when you get so focused on the product. And I was joking with a friend the other day. He said it again, and he said, like, we found product market fit. And I was like, wait a minute, like, you made it sound like you went into the basement, ruffled through a bunch of stuff, and like found product market fit, and like done. Like, we're good, let's move on. You know, hire a bunch of SDRs, double your marketing budget. And this is one of these things that we kept hearing over and over. And I think, and certainly in Silicon Valley, sort of embrace this concept of product market fit as this destination of sorts. And I think what you're hearing here is, okay, we had to get this right, but we also had to build this machine underlying in the company to be able to actually have processes in place that you could have not just one product market fit, but a regular drumbeat of many product market fits. And I think process in startups is oftentimes a four-letter word. Like, nobody wants to hear that word. It's just keep moving as fast as you can. But I think what I've seen, and certainly I think you all have experienced it, is you've got to have the right lightweight processes in place so that you can have this sort of what we call sort of the system for repeatable genius, as it were. But I'd love for you to talk more about the process, because you guys have process in place today.
Yes, we do now. And you're right, Steve. Like, when you're a startup, you think, like, if I just work really hard and late, then it'll be fine. I just got to get to the next step. But when we realized that the product wasn't working, in order to redesign the product, we did redesign the process. And so we took, basically our process to redesign the process was doing an audit of, like, what's working, what's not working, where were our big failure modes, how did we get ourselves in this place to begin with, and then how do we find our way out of it. And so now we have, it sounds really simple, it sounds really obvious, but it's a custom phased approach for us that still balances and still incorporates user feedback. And so having that user feedback and also the staged approach to balance empathy, technology, business, market needs.
What was the hardest part about building maybe the team or the process for you from the business side, Cara?
So we're doing a product that has a long production cycle, a long R&D cycle, and I think that in the beginning, keeping the team really motivated for the next 9 months, or like, we're going to tool up in 6 months, just hold on, just keep sprinting, was hard. But actually this process, the phased approach, helps everybody sprint, and then we can take a step back and celebrate hitting our milestone, and then sprint again. And it just gets kind of everybody rowing in the same direction at the same time. So process, I think, has alleviated this notion of, like, we have a really hard task ahead of us and there's no end, the end sight is so far in the future.
Got it. So, one of the things when I kind of roll the clock back to when I was a product designer, young product designer, there was like this phrase that was all over Silicon Valley and certainly in the product circles, I think even still today, around like the best idea wins. And I totally believed that. Like, it was, it just felt so good, self-affirming. I'm a product designer. If I have a good idea, let's go. And then I saw all these wildly successful businesses that did not have the best ideas. It was absolutely clear that, like, that's not what was going on there. And I think what I began to observe was, oh, they have incredible sales and marketing execution, or they've figured out how to tap into a business model that has brilliant network effects. And so I began to kind of, as a designer, sort of look at and begin to appreciate all of these other components that could be as beautiful as a great design product could be. And I would say also, I think one of the things that I had to observe in myself was, like, when the conversations would shift from a detail around a product, like, where are we going to gate this part, or how are we going to sort of think about this human interface element, I would start to kind of like get a little bit, withdrawn. I didn't want to talk about customer acquisition. It wasn't fun to think about, amortization of fixed costs and the bills and materials that I was building. It was like all this stuff that, by the way, is not that complicated or hard, but we somehow kind of pull back from it as designers. And so what I've found is I have to, like, run to the fight on that stuff and just go get super smart on the things that are, that are perhaps a little bit uncomfortable. And this is kind of in the section of the book around just getting smart on business. So I'd love for you all, sort of like, how did you run to the fight? What was the ways in which you kind of got smart on business?
So for me, I don't have a business background. In fact, I remember sitting in a class at Stanford that was for entrepreneurial leaders, and I'd show up. It was a lecture class. I'd show up every week and hear people talk about their business, and I just sat there and like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And so going in, I think, especially as women, we have this notion that we have to, and like you see it with job applicants. I think the same thing is true often with entrepreneurs. Job applicants, women feel like they have to be 100% qualified in order to apply for a job. And men, on average, feel like they need to be 60% qualified to apply to the same job, right? And so the way that I got smart on business, the same way I got smart on product design, which is by doing it, by showing up, and like just sheer grit and determination of believing like this is going to happen. I don't know how yet, but I know it's going to happen.
And I think on behalf of the team, as the only business person at Moxxly right now, or the most like formally trained in business, the shared passion and this shared vision to get this product into the market and to help this brand realize its dreams. Like, we all know that we can't do that unless we ship a product, and the product has to be affordable, it has to be functional, like we've got to tick all of those kind of marketing needs in order to do what we all came here to do. So that keeps us grounded and focused. And on the fundraising side, funders taught me a lot about business as well, and I think it's a healthy tension that sometimes was over-indexed on our funders pushing us to deliver, a different kind of business model. How about subscription? How about you do this, that, or the other thing that maybe our users didn't care about? But at least those conversations were there was healthy tension there. Like, we've got to keep hitting the milestones, and funders want to see a return on the investment.
Steve, so you see a lot of pitches, right? And presumably from designer founders, what do you see or don't see that you should see in funder or designers?
I think it's interesting because I think I was joking before about, design used to be this thing that got bolted on in the 11th hour. And I observed maybe from at least a half of the folks that I interviewed that so many designers actually have the same do the same thing to business in reverse, right? They literally bolt on a business model in the 11th hour. And I was like, you guys, you're doing the same thing that the business people are doing to you. And I think it's a very common failure mode. And so I definitely look for marketing to be integrated into the product. Like, you're not thinking about marketing as something that happens after you design your product. You're thinking about, how does the product market itself? You're thinking about the business model from day zero. It becomes part of a design challenge. It's like, oh, how do I think about the fact that I need to actually sell this to someone? Perhaps it's too expensive, or it needs to have a subscription business model, as a design challenge, and frame it that way so that you begin to sort of treat it the same way you might treat one of these other things. And I think just kind of unlocking that, my friend Diego Rodriguez used to say, it's like designing without thinking about the business model is like designing a bridge without gravity. It's like, yeah, of course, there needs to be a business model here. So I definitely look for that to happen as well. Maybe one thing, so in so many ways, we've kind of been talking about product design and value creation. You guys, built this business, this incredible brand, clear vision and mission around what you wanted to do. And yet at the same time, there's also this sort of component of value expression and being able to sort of see how that company value might get unlocked over time. So almost every startup experiences what you guys had to go through or went through successfully, which is, how do you handle M&A? Like, oftentimes you're going to get an M&A inbound interest early in the life cycle. How did you guys manage that process? How did you think about it? How did that go?
So Moxxly was venture-backed and angel-backed. We went through a seed round, and again, maybe some of you have been through this. There are very few venture investors who will touch hardware. So you've already got this small slice of the funding market that's going to touch hardware, and then of that small slice, there's an even smaller slice of people who want to spend, the next 5 to 7 years working on products for women or thinking about the breast pump industry, and that's the reality. So as designer founders, we had to design a way around and through the realities of what we were working on. And the first part of that is building empathy and building bridges to our funders. So getting them hooked on the story, and why should they care? Well, maybe they care, but maybe they don't, feel the passion about why the breast pump should be better, but they can see the business opportunity, or they can see where this brand ladders out in the real world, and the big opportunity that we're going after. Like, how can we build these points of connection and empathy and make it worthwhile to the person who's sitting across the table? So that's how we got our financing and our funding. But we also knew the realities, and over the course of Moxxly's lifetime, actually the brief window where IoT and consumer hardware was kind of hot, or at least warm, it got cooler over that that period. So we were always looking for partners, and we could just leave it as broadly as that so that nobody got too nervous on any side of the table. Who could we partner to help us build this brand and get this product out? And when we first started, we were just infants on our startup journey. The #1 player in the breast pump space came to visit us. And we stayed in touch with them. We kept that relationship warm. We didn't tell them what we were doing. We didn't tell them anything at all. But we told them about our brand and why we were doing it, and they saw that, and they saw our passion, and we made ourselves look bigger than we were, and kind of showed them that we weren't afraid to go out and compete with them because we came here to make a better breast pump experience. And we made relationships with other players in the industry because we knew that great companies are not sold, they are bought. So when the time came to really pick up the pace of those conversations about what would a partnership look like, those calls were warm calls, and we could kind of quickly go into we didn't have to do that dance at that point. We could just go down the M&A path in a more straightforward way.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is when we did get to that point, the process was easier for us, not only because we had those warm contacts already, but because we knew from the beginning what was the most important to us. And it wasn't to, we were very clear on we want to make this experience better for as many women as we can. Because if it doesn't get out into the hands of people, then it's just play, right?
So the notion of scaling the idea, the mission that you guys were so excited about, started to feel like it could be more real to the extent that you were a part of something larger, a part of Medela. So how's it gone since being acquired? Tell us about that experience. Little startup inside a big company.
It's awesome. We got our own hotel room here at South by. we eat a couple meals a day. It's great. What's cool about the Moxxly M&A story is that they saw what we were doing, and they loved how we do Moxxly. They love our process, and they were like, we are not going to fold this into our R&D, machine. So they kept us as Moxxly. We're a standalone brand. We're the same team. We still work in the same, sort of dirty wood shop in San Francisco. And now we have resources, and we have, expertise that we can call, but we're still the same company.
Our startup fairy tale.
Yeah, this is, by the way, pretty anomalous. This doesn't happen. It's happened in one other company that I work closely with, but to be able to actually do what you're doing, stay on the mission, not have your team get cherry-picked, very unusual. So what's next for Moxxly?
So we're shipping our product this fall. Tell all of your new mom friends that help is on the way. Moxxly Flow will allow them to pump with their clothes on wherever they want. They can pump at South by at the panels next year. But beyond the pump itself, Moxxly's never been about the breast pump. We're building a brand for the modern working woman to help her through the early stages of working through what it's like to be a working woman who is also a mother, with products and services that are designed especially for her.
Big mission. That was the what, right? Yeah, that's the what. Cool. So one of the things I think that became very clear to me, particularly as I was sort of beginning the wrap on sort of what were the ideas in the way to design that kind of emerged from these many interviews, was this notion that I think is central to what they have built in Moxxly, which is I think modern businesses and organizations are coming to realize that they're going to rise and fall based entirely on the relationships that they build with their customers, as opposed to any one-off transaction. It's not about one product. It's not about the V1. It's about this experience that you've talked about. It's the feelings that you have. It's the sort of entire journey that you have with this company. And I think so many folks, again, not those who are designers here in the room, but I think still fall into the trap of design as this sort of aesthetic lever. Jobs said it's not about how it looks, it's about how it works, and I would add to that sort of how does it actually work for real human beings. And so I think what I'm seeing anyway is this movement that you're going to see folks who are coming at product design and company building from the design domain that have that sort of more fundamental sense of the human condition, that understand sort of what are the needs and wants, and have this kind of just obsessive empathy about building products that really, people love. So I'd love maybe just, to kind of get your perspective on, what for you all, when you think about that challenge of building, not just a breast pump, of this larger challenge, this challenge of greater import, what for you was the sort of the font that was like feeding this thing? What, Gabrielle, you've talked about this with passion before. I want to hear kind of, what was underlying all this?
So for me, I think that design is all about context. And what we were seeing with the pump that's out there now, that it's designed for use at home, it's designed for use in hospitals, but that's not, if you fast forward to where we are today, that's not where people are using it. People are using it in spaces like this, they're using it at work, they're using it on go, on airplanes. And so thinking about not just the product, but the holistic picture, the entire world in which our users live and breathe and work and play and what they care about and what motivates them and why do they do this thing that is so hard to do and they hate this thing that they use in order to get what they want, but they still come back and do it. And so for us, that's the way that we've been thinking about it and the way that I think has changed everything for us and why we always landed on it has to be discreet, it has to be hands-free, it has to feel like a lifestyle product, not a medical device, because she's not a patient, she's a woman, right?
And on the company side, so the company corollary is what I want the Moxxly story to do for other entrepreneurs is to show that you can use design thinking on the business side or on the capital side, or like it's figuring out how to get from point A to point B, because where I think in Silicon Valley we're seeing more instances of design baked into the product development and into the founding team, there still seems to be this singular narrative of I have a startup, so therefore I must go to Sand Hill Road and raise my Series A and then my Series B and blah, blah, blah. Like there's just this rigidity around how we do startups, and I think if we shook that up a bit and came at it with more of a creative process, entrepreneurs could find more wins if you widened the definition of what a win is.
Awesome. We're going to hand it over to questions in a minute, but maybe one thing I'd love to just share as well, which was one of the last pieces in the book, is this notion of how designers are beginning to need to worry about not just building a product that is successful, but what are the consequences of that success. In other words, there's actually a line in Tim Brown's book called Change by Design, which he talks about, Henry Ford should have not just been thinking about designing the automobile, but actually this whole system around it of transit and the fact that, of course, the car changed the way we plan cities. As designers, I'm quite sure that we're not always thinking about the downstream consequences of what we build. Mark Zuckerberg, whatever, he started Facebook basically to connect with friends on campus. I don't think he could have ever envisaged that the same platform could have been used, 15 years later to co-opt the election of the most powerful person on the planet. And this is really important, I think, for designers to begin to understand is how your piece fits in a larger whole. So there's a whole section on this around systems design that, for those who are interested, I'd encourage you to take a look, because I do think we're going from human-centered to humanity-centered in the design world, and I think that's really important. So happy to open it up to questions for folks that have things that you'd like to bounce off the team or us, and we'll go from there.
Howdy, thank you guys so much for sharing your experience. It has been really valuable for me. I was particularly wondering, especially in the early stages of development, outside of having the strong brand, were there any particular details you had on how you made your market research more relevant in that stage?
The question is, how do we make our market research more relevant?
Yeah, how much of your market research in the beginning was actually useful for your product in the end, and was there any particular philosophy or focus that you had to keep it that way?
So it was kind of a both-end approach. We did the big, what's going on out there in lactation, right? Mm-hmm. Big picture. But from our brand development work, we have a point of view about who our user is, what her name is, where she shops, where she works, what she looks like, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So then that brand focus can help us select for users to involve in our studies, and they don't all look like her, they're not all her, but we can say, like, you know, she is or is not, and then measure the difference in responses.
Gotcha. Thank you.
By the way, we have some books up front. Meg has them for folks who want to ask questions, not to egg you on. Go for it. Next question.
Hey, how y'all doing? I'm Toby. I'm a student at Syracuse University right now, working on a startup called Doodle the News, where we're trying to help kids learn about the world and teach each other about the world. And my question, it kind of works out because you obviously have children, is how do you design a successful and repeatable business model? I mean, just bare bones answer, but how do you do design for students that are like middle schoolers or like high schoolers, like the younger generations?
Good question, and I would say we've seen lots of different experiments in terms of business models. There are direct-to-consumer models where you're trying to sell to not necessarily the children, but actually the children's parents, usually.
Or like organizations and like school districts.
Well, that would be a different one, but yeah, but
sure.
But another alternative would be to go through the organizations themselves. Companies like Remind have done this, where they're selling to school districts, you're creating a chat platform. But what we've seen is there's a lot of opportunity, as I alluded to at the very beginning, for innovation around education, and the communication component is a big piece of that. The struggle that we've historically seen has been around market entry, because a lot of decisions take a long time to happen in you know, when you're approaching school districts. And as a young startup, as you heard from this team, sometimes you just got to go fast, right? Like your speed is your greatest lever, and so figuring out how to engage the market in a cost-effective and timely way is I think the greatest challenge.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Hello. As a non-designer, what can I do to support people that are designers in my company and understand design as a verb? And then following up with that, a second question is, what can I do to make myself more design focused? What resources can I utilize to produce that mindset as well?
Well, there's a book.
Yes.
I feel like Stephen Colbert. Here's the book. You should hear from them, but I do think what was really important about this book was not just designers as the audience, because it is actually, I mean, you're seeing it here in the kind of click and clack. They kind of are two halves of the same brain. But business folks need to think about design differently. And I mean, tell us how you guys are different in this regard.
Sure. So I can come at it from how, you know, as a designer, it all comes down to motivations, right? And like what motivates your team and your designers, as well as, you know, non-designers. Why do they do what they do? Why do they work how they work? And having an open communication, and then tying, you know, ideally everyone you're working with, whether it's your employees or your funders, your users, everyone should share a bit of that shared vision, like whatever, like that big what and why that you're doing. And so connecting their motivations to the larger team vision, and then having an open communication about it, you know, finding your own cadence, whether it's, you know, weekly check-ins or design reviews, having understanding up front, if like going in for a design review, for example, having a clear understanding of like, why are we here? What is this? What are the goals of this review? So everyone's on the same page and there's no misunderstandings, because it can be like, as a designer, you put your soul into things, right? It's not just numbers. There's a lot of art to it as well, and so it can be tricky for some designers to tear apart that. It can feel really personal, right? And so setting up, it's like a very tactical advice, but just setting up the review of what is this review? What are we getting out of it? What are the goals? And keeping it about the design and not about the designer is one way. And then just having that kind of communication across team.
Awesome. Thank you.
Just a shorthand. I would think of design anytime you think of problem solving. And design your way out of that problem with you, as you or your designers.
And adding to that, invite your designers in as co-founders. I think it's oftentimes, again, the temptation is to wait too late till you're, 4, 5, 10 people. But invite them into the kind of the pupil stage of the company, and I think you'll be better off.
Hi. So as a designer and a mom, I've been dealing with this for about 1.5 years because I'm still breastfeeding. And to me, actually, one of the biggest hurdles is travel. I had to do a lot of business travel, overnight, 2-night, 3-night now. Are you guys thinking about that on your, like, as a next step? Storks is completely expensive. Company supports it, but it's like ridiculous. And it doesn't really work for shorter trips. It works for long trips. Airports, gross. And all that together, like just going through TSA is a horrible experience. Every time you're flagged, you're like screened, like they throw chemicals in your hands, they screen your milk because I don't know what you're gonna put in there. Are you guys thinking about that as a next step?
Yes. We are absolutely walking through our users, and as Gabrielle said earlier, like the breast pump is not just used in the hospital. So what we're doing with this first product is giving you the dignity and the confidence to pump wherever you are, so that we can't alleviate the need to pump every couple of hours. We can't alleviate, we can't make it come out of the ears, right? But we can help you keep your clothes on, so you can sit in your airport seat or sit, as I said, right there. Like, just be where you are instead of having this additional logistical embarrassing layer. But certainly, to add it on to your travel duties. And then certainly in the product itself, we're thinking about how compact can we make it? How does this stack in her purse? Is this going to spill when it gets put in the overhead compartment? So we're walking the walk with our users throughout their day.
Thank you.
Hello. So as entrepreneurs, I wanted to ask you, what made your idea the one that you guys decided to stick on? Because I know that doing school, especially business school, you get tons of ideas, and through life you get tons of ideas. So what made this the right one for you to focus on? And then do you suggest any resources that can help from an idea to start, so a concept or a brand or a business model, whichever one you start with? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
So there's this book. So quickly for me, it was literally that hunch that I did at work with my shirt off, and I would get a little bit cold, and the partition walls would fall down when other women were jostling them, and it was just like, why are we in this dank little corner of this office building feeling like this, that I couldn't shake? And there are more attractive business options and opportunities out there, but it was that feeling of like, I am indignant about this and I want to fix it, that drove me and continues to drive me. So my advice to entrepreneurs kind of looking for that right fit is to kind of listen and feel it in your gut, because you have to have that fire to get you through the hard parts. If it's just an attractive case study that seems like, oh, this is a good business opportunity, you can walk away really, really easily when the going gets rough.
Yeah, and I can share with that, stealing some advice from somebody else. If you can imagine doing anything else, do that. But if you can't, then do it. And for me, I'm not a mom, I haven't gone through this personally, but I came into product design really passionate about the stories that all the objects that surround us and that we bring into our lives tell about us as individuals and as a society. And so when I learned about the breast pump and I saw it for the first time, and I saw Laura struggling to get back on her feet at work and be the boss woman that she is, you ask, wow, what does this object say about society and the way that we treat women, the way that we value women who return to work after having children? And so when that was the moment, it's like, I can't not do this.
There was also a general question I think you had around getting started, and I would just point you to the business model canvas as a good sort of starter tool. There's lots of other resources, happy to share more offline, but it is absolutely one of those components when you're kind of trying to figure out how to go from one step to the next. That's pretty helpful.
You said Canvas?
Business model canvas, yeah.
Hi. Thanks for your work. It's been 30 years since I did any breastfeeding myself, but my recollection is, and I was lucky enough to stay home, but at the time there was almost inevitable pressure from all over the place to give it up at the first chance you had. So this product will help people. But that got me to thinking about, have you designed a social responsibility component into your business or this product in particular? Because there's a number of, breast milk to give away, La Leche League, things like that. So is that part of your design?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our role as Moxxly, as a brand in the breast pump product space right now, is really focused on our user, this woman. So we're not real, and our value add is empowering her to make decisions and to give her the confidence when she returns to work, the tools and the confidence. So we really focus on her. We focus on educating her, on supporting her, giving her the tools that she needs, because she's already getting a lot of inbound judging and opinions from everywhere else on the internet in her life about how long she should breastfeed and whether she should go back to work and all of that. So we're not focused on those parts of the ecosystem. We are laser focused on her and setting her up for success. And if she decides to breastfeed, then we're going to make that as seamless as possible for her, as long as she wants to do it.
Yeah, and adding to that, because you're right, there's a lot of pressure from a lot of different places on women, and it's like a long history of people telling women what they should do with their bodies. But we're looking out and thinking, like, how do we alleviate that pressure? Certainly we can do it with the product and the brand and the messaging, but we also want to, because we're focused on women at work, we want to go into workplaces and talk to HR and talk to managers about how can we support you, support her.
Last question.
Hi, I'm a product designer at Google, and I'm about to pitch an idea to our internal incubator. And I was wondering if the two of you could go back in time to the very beginning when you were sort of at that stage. What advice would you give yourselves?
Focus. We were focused on brand and we were focused on product, but we bit off more than we should have with the first rev. We had our app in iOS and Android out the gate, and we didn't need to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's so much, especially when you have that vision that fuels you and you can see years in the future, you want to get there as soon as possible, but realizing that you have to do it one step at a time and really chunk out those things into tiny pieces as possible just to get to the next step, to the next milestone,
So we'll take your question maybe offline, but I just want to end by thanking Cara and Gabrielle. They built an amazing product, created a really compelling mission and company that we're excited to see from afar. And also one of their investors is in the front row over here, Enrique Allen, who's one of the co-founders of Designer Fund, who's been a huge supporter of both the company as well as this book project. And for those of you who are still curious to learn more, come on up. I'm happy to chat, and we'll hang around for a few more minutes. But thanks for coming. Big important thing in front of us, and we hope you'll all be a part of the ride. So,
thank you.
Thank you.